Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us, taking time out of your schedule, out of your busy schedule, to learn some Torah. Tonight is Tu B'Av, which is a very happy day on the Jewish calendar. And it's the day on which young men and young women would go out to the fields and they would meet one another, and it would be a day of lots of shidduchim and a great day of celebration. The topic tonight that we're going to be learning together, and it's just so meaningful for me that you're joining to do the learning, to learn together with us. And also I appreciate if you're able to keep your video on, so this way I could see you and it helps us connect with one another. It's totally fine, however, if you don't want to be on video and you just want to be on audio, it's also good. So no pressure. But it is good if I could see you as well. So this way we could connect even more meaningfully with one another. The topic that we're going to learn tonight is Ahavat Yisrael, love of Jews and love of the Jewish people. I chose this topic for two reasons. Firstly, because with Tisha B'Av behind us and Tu B'Av, the 15th day of Av, tonight and tomorrow, so this is the time, Shabbos Nachamu and Tu B'Av signifies when things change course. Right? Nachem, Nechama, Shabbat Nachamu means when things are heading in one direction and it turns around and heads in another direction. So for example, in the aftermath of the Cheda Egel, so it says that Hashem wants to destroy Bnei Yisrael for their sin, for their betrayal. And Moshe prays on behalf of Israel. And it says, Vayinachem Hashem. Hashem changes course and forgives the Jewish people. When a person is sitting Shiva, right, we wish them Nechama because we want the Avel not just to think about what he or she lost, but to think about the relationship that they had with the person and that they're going to carry forward that relationship with them into the future. Noach, right? Nechama is related to the word Noach. Noach was also, right, the world was going in a downward direction. And Noach kind of represented the future of humanity, and that the world had a future. So Nachem and Nachamu and Tu B'Av all represent the idea of if things are heading in one direction, we have that capacity to turn things around. And we could actually take the hardships and take the challenges, and we could use it as like a fulcrum to leverage that for momentum to actually move in the right direction to uplift ourselves. And so on Tisha B'Av, we mourn the Churban, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. The rabbis teach us that the Churban, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, was a result of sinat chinam, was hatred of one another for no reason, baseless hatred. So if we truly want to turn things around, if we want things to go in a better direction, if we want to have a chance to bring the Yeshua for the Jewish people, so instead of sinat chinam, we have to engage in ahavat chinam, in love of other Jews, even if there's no reason, even if it's sometimes hard to love another Jew, sometimes hard to love members of our extended family. But if the Churban was caused by sinat chinam, baseless hatred, so now is the time to try to step it up, especially during these tough times, to be there for each other and to engage in ahavat chinam, in love for one another, even if there's no logical reason. So that's one reason why I chose this topic tonight. The second reason why I chose this topic is because the Shiur is being dedicated by my mother, who is on the Shiur, who is on the call. And so it's dedicated by her, and together with me, we're dedicating the Shiur in memory of my father, my mom's husband, Harav Aryeh Ephraim ben Klonimus Kalman. And he was someone who exhibited a tremendous amount of Ahavat Yisrael, a love of all Jews, also a love of all people too, whether Hasidic or Yeshivish or modern Orthodox or non-Orthodox. He was able to connect and bring together all different types of Jews. And my father's yahrzeit was today, the 14th day of Av. And so I'm thankful to my mom for dedicating the Shiur in his memory. Most of you didn't have the privilege to know my father. He was someone who was a respected psychologist who had many from patients, and he worked in the public school system in New York, but also he had a private practice, and he helped many from patients, navigate life's challenges. He had a smicha. He had rabbinic ordination from RJJ together with Rabbi Moshe Heyer, and my father, and Rabbi Heyer mentions my father in his introduction to his book. And my father had a tremendous love of learning. He was constantly learning, and he loved our Hasidic Rav's Torah, but at the same time, he loved Rav Soloveitchik's Torah. And he gave over that love of learning to his family. About my father, I think he had a commitment to Torah, to authentic tradition, but he applied it to the modern world in which he lived. That's why his favorite commentary on Chumash was Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. I always remember in shul. He wasn't always quiet in shul. Don't tell anyone I said that. But he would spend time learning. He would learn a lot in shul also. And his favorite commentary was Rav Hirsch, who combined Torah im derech eretz, right? Torah combined with engagement with the world. And sometimes if Rav Hirsch didn't have so much commentary on a few psukim, he would joke that Rav Hirsch was on vacation. It was the summer, he was on vacation, so he didn't give so much commentary on those psukim. So my father had a wonderful sense of humor, gregarious personality, and he loved sports, he loved traveling. He had a beautiful relationship with my mom, and so I miss him very much. But I remember him, very, very often, and so pleased to be able to dedicate this shiur to his memory. My father was someone, he walked into a room with no friends, and he would make 20 friends. He was able to bring simcha in a unique way even to a Beis Avel. He just had my father was irreverent to some degree, very boisterous, gregarious personality. And, but he was somehow able to, with tact, he was able to bring simcha, of course, to a party, but also even to a Beis Avel, which just showed his ability to connect with people. So he was someone who had Ahavat Yisrael, and this shiur about Ahavat Yisrael should be a schus for his neshama. One so let's learn a number of sources relating to Ahavat Yisrael. We got to turn around the sinas chinam and make it Ahavat chinam. You might have seen there's this initiative called the Machzom Lefi initiative in Los Angeles and in other cities as well. You might have seen this, that it's encouraging members of our community to refrain from Lashon Hara for at least an hour a day from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Did anyone here see this? All right, so I guess it's reassuring to see some of the things we send out. When we send it with a lot of stuff, sometimes it's hard to catch everything. But anyway, this is the time. This is the time where, let's see, my father who's sitting here with me was an RJJ with your father. Really? Wow. That's incredible. Okay, so maybe you'll, does he want to share something?
Your father well. It's the same smicha group together. I'm in the Ahavat in Yankee Yeshiva.
Right. So I know. So you're with your son. Your son. I don't really know either of you too well, but I know your son told me that he heard my shiur, and I said he's welcome to join the shiur. Where do you live? Where are you sitting now?
We're in Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, New York, Borough Park to be exact.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Mr. Zucker, you remember my father from RJJ?
Yeah, of course. We used to meet in Mountain Food in the country when your father was in Beaver Lake.
That's right.
And you remember his grandfather?
Grandfather, I remember. Your grandfather was a tremendous pastor. In between work, he used to sit and learn. He used to learn.
Wow, I'm named after my grandfather. Wow, so
named after his grandfather.
Yeah.
So it's really, really special to meet you and to hear those memories. And thank you so much for joining the shiur. Okay, so let's learn about the topic of Ahavat Yisrael. I only mentioned that issue of the Machzom Lefi because it's encouraging people to engage in Ahavat Yisrael and to refrain from Lashon Hara at least 1 hour a day. So if somebody calls you between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m., and they ask you to speak about another person, what you tell them is, call me back later. No, I'm just kidding around. We try to refrain from lashon hara all day long, but I guess is to try to at least to emphasize it, to focus on proper speech, to really pay extra attention during that hour. So I just mentioned that because that's an initiative going around LA and I think other cities to try to get us thinking about love of other people, giving people the benefit of the doubt, seeing the goodness of other people. So let's learn some sources with that lengthy introduction. Let's learn some sources about this topic. The famous saying of the rabbis is Kol Yisrael arevim zel hazeh. All the Jewish people are arevim one to the other. The word arevim could be related to the word harev, which means to be sweet. When we say the blessing over the Torah in the morning, we say V'harevna Hashem Elokeinu. Make the words of Torah sweet to us and our family. So perhaps one interpretation of this line, of this dictum of the rabbis of Kol Yisrael arevim zel hazeh, is that we should see the sweetness of one another. We should see the goodness of one another, and all of the Jews should be sweet towards one another and see the sweetness and the goodness in the other. The simple interpretation of this line, of course, is arev means to be like a guarantor, and it means that every single Jew is responsible for every other Jew. There's a concept in halacha called yotza motzi. What that means is if you fulfill the mitzvah, let's say like Kiddush on Shabbos, and there's somebody else who's in shul, somebody, a neighbor, a friend, somebody who's not a friend, somebody who's a Jew who didn't fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, so the halacha is that you're able, whether you're a man or a woman, you're able to recite Kiddush again to be motzi, to help the other Jew fulfill the mitzvah. So the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, writing in 13th century Spain, wonders, wait a second, isn't that a blessing in vain? You've already recited Kiddush and fulfilled the mitzvah. Why do we allow you to say the blessing again if you've already fulfilled your mitzvah? So the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, explains, he says, if another Jew hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah yet, your fulfillment is deficient. There's something lacking in your fulfillment. And so that doesn't mean you have to run around Los Angeles or run around Brooklyn, making sure that every single person said Kiddush. But it means is that if you're aware of someone who hasn't said Kiddush and they're looking to you to say Kiddush on their behalf because they don't know how to say it or for whatever reason, you're allowed to say it for them because you have not completely fulfilled your mitzvah. If somebody else, if there's another Jew who hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah. And the Ran says this is based on Kol Yisrael arevim zel hazeh. We're all responsible for one another in terms of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. And if there's another Jew down the block or in your community who's not doing the mitzvah properly, so you have to be careful about it. You have to know your place. We'll talk about it. But that affects you as well. And that means your observance, that's something you should be concerned about. And your observance is deficient. Okay, I think did I lose sound?
No, you're okay.
Am I good now?
Yes.
I hear you fine.
Okay. I might have lost sound there for a little bit. If you don't hear me, go like this, okay? So or something, let me, or just give me a wave. Okay, Simone, could you hear me?
We can hear you, but it just got really quiet. It got really soft. Your voice is a lot lower.
Okay. There's something.
It's like a lot quieter.
It may just be us.
I don't know if it's just us.
I think there's something, usually my internet connection is solid, but it could be that my internet connection for some reason
It
is
could be
weak.
our phone. I'm sorry.
No, there is something.
We can hear you. It's just quiet.
Okay.
I hear you well.
We
Okay.
hear you very well. I can hear you well.
Okay.
Okay, then it's us. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So now, where do we see this in Chumash? Simone, you could always interrupt. No worries. Nice to have a chance to say hello. Where do we see this in Chumash? We see that when Binyamin was taken prisoner by the Egyptian viceroy, we know that Egyptian viceroy is Yosef, but the brothers did not recognize him. And in a very dramatic moment, Yehuda says, Ki avdecha arav et hanar. that your servant has made a commitment to be a guarantor. You having trouble hearing me? Can't hear me?
Hear you well. Hear you well.
I hear you fine.
Me
I
too.
hear
I
you.
hear fine.
I hear you.
Me too.
Okay, I'm just gonna go.
It's
Okay.
fine.
All right, so Yehuda said that that ki abdecha arav tanar, that your servant, he says to the Egyptian viceroy, that your servant has made a commitment to be a guarantor for this young man, and so I can't leave him here. I cannot leave him here in Egypt. I have to bring him home. I made a commitment to be a guarantor for him and to bring him home to his father, and you take me instead of him. And the rabbis teach us that it was because of that moment that Yehuda merited leadership. Because he demonstrated that principle, and this is maybe one of the reasons why we're called Yehudim, Jews, right? Because he demonstrated that principle in a beautiful fashion of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelozeh. The next mitzvah that I wanted to bring to your attention is the mitzvah Lo Tikom Velo Titor, which means that a person is not supposed to take revenge and you're not allowed to bear a grudge. This is a very, very challenging mitzvah. If somebody hurts you or embarrasses you, harms you in some kind of way, that, okay, you're not allowed to take revenge, but to not even bear a grudge in your heart is a very, very demanding standard that the Torah requires of us. I'm not going to get into the whole topic and give all the different reasons to explain this mitzvah. And there's 5 different strategies. There's 5 different strategies as to how a person could be successful in forgiving another person and not bearing a grudge against another person. But one of the reasons that's given is offered by the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Jerusalem Talmud says that because the reason why you shouldn't bear a grudge and you shouldn't take revenge is because all the Jews, all of Bnei Yisrael, are like one organic entity, like one body. And it gives an example, gives a mashal. It says that if you're cutting steak, and by accident, when you're cutting the steak, you cut your finger, you're cutting with the right hand, and you cut your left hand, would you ever think that then you would take the knife with your left hand and take revenge on the right hand? You wouldn't take revenge, and you're not going to bear a grudge because you're all part of one body. And so you're annoyed, you're upset, but you're all in it together as your one body, and so you're not going to take revenge. And so too the Yerushalmi says, that's why the Torah expects of us and asks us to strive, easier said than done, but asks us to try to not bear a grudge against another Jew. Sure, if somebody does something wrong, you have a right to ask for an apology. You could say to the person, you know, what you said was really hurtful. What you did was really not right. And you could express that to the person. And the person is supposed to apologize to you. And so the Torah doesn't require you to be like a stone without any feelings. But what it means is, the Torah says, is that you're supposed to try to reach a level at which you're not going to bear a grudge against another person. Because you have to, I'm just trying to, if you could keep yourself on mute, because then the sound, especially if the sound is weak, try to keep yourself on mute unless you want to speak up, but keep yourself on mute because otherwise the sound ends up blocking the transmission. Yashikoach. All right, so, and that conveys the tremendous principle, which is that if one Jew is in danger, if one Jew is in harm's way, wherever he or she might live, then we all should feel threatened. We all feel we're in danger, right? Because why? So it's not just that we're responsible for one another because of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelozeh. It's not just that if somebody didn't fulfill the mitzvah, so you're deficient in some sense, and so that allows you to say the Kiddush again. What it also means is like we're one body. We're one entity. We have a past, we have a future, and we share a fate in the contemporary era, and so we're all in it together as one body, and that's the reason why the Yerushalmi says you're not supposed to take revenge and bear a grudge. My Rosh Yeshiva in Gush, Rabbi Yehuda Amital Zatzal, he spoke about the fact that in Judaism we have values: Torah, Chesed, community, right? Anivus, right? You have all different values that we have. But it's also important to recognize that there's a hierarchy of values, right? That let's say you have a tension and a conflict between two values. What do you do if you have a conflict between emes and shalom? Right? If somebody contacts you and says that where you have the truth tells you to do one thing, but to be peaceful, to be tolerant, to be kind, to be nice would maybe point you in a different direction. So you have to figure out at every situation how you navigate, how you integrate that combination of emes and shalom. There's a little bit of a tangent, but it relates to Tisha B'Av. The pasuk in Zechariah says that all the fast days in the future are going to become holidays. And the last three words of that pasuk is v'ha emet v'ha shalom ehavu, that truth and peace you shall love. And the Rambam, when he quotes this pasuk from Zechariah the Navi, he says all the fast days of Tisha B'Av, Shavasar B'Tammuz, of Tzom Gedalia, all those fast days that relate to the process of destruction, that in the end of days, they're going to become celebrations. The Rambam says why? He says they're going to become celebrations, and he quotes, Va'emes v'shalom ehavu, and truth and peace you shall love. What in the world does that have to do with anything? That's a total non sequitur. That's almost as much as a non sequitur as this non sequitur to the Shiur that I'm saying now. What does that have to do with the fact that the fast days are going to become holidays? So Rav Soloveitchik said, because it's so hard to synthesize and integrate those two values of truth and peace. Right? You're sitting at the Shabbat table, and the host says to you, what do you think of my soup? So do you tell the truth? Or do you try to be peaceful? Your friend comes back from the mall and she's wearing a sweater and she says, what do you think about this sweater? Do you tell the truth, which is that it's just a downright ugly sweater, or that you found it on a sale at 50% off and so she overpaid? Or do you think about shalom and just being nice and kind and saying that it's a beautiful sweater? And of course, those are just two kind of like mundane examples of a very, very challenging topic. Somebody calls you and they say, should I go into business with such and such a person? So do you tell the truth, or do you try to just to be peaceful? So the halacha is in that case that because that person might be harmed if he goes into business with this guy who's dishonest, so then you are supposed to tell the truth. Right? You're not supposed to speak lashon hara, but if somebody's going to be harmed, so then you're supposed to say, if you're sure that it's true, and you're not going to exaggerate, and you don't have any ulterior motives, so then you're supposed to say what would otherwise be lashon hara. You should say to the person, I would recommend maybe not going into business with that person. I don't know if you want to consider that the girl or that guy for a shidduch. So these are very, very tricky, complicated things, but Rav Soloveitchik said that emes and shalom, very, very, very hard to navigate. And so it's only in Yemos HaMashiach, it's only in the end of days, when Mashiach comes, that we're going to figure out the way to harmonize and synthesize properly truth and peace. And it really fits a little bit into this shiur in terms of our relationship with other Jews, which we'll come back to, which is that, we have certain convictions and values. We believe in Torah min hashamayim, Torah from heaven. We believe in the obligation that we have to do mitzvos. And then there are many, many Jews who seem to be distant, right? Who are distant from Torah, distant from observance. And so even though we have our convictions and what we believe is the truth, but at the same time, we can, at the same time, love and respect and care about every single Jew. So this actually is a core point of the shiur. It turns out that sometimes tangents actually end up relating to the topic at hand. That emet and shalom is really something very, very important to think about by Ahavat Yisrael. It's very easy to love a Jew who you get along with. it's very easy to love a Jew who you go to the ball game with. It's very easy to love a Jew, perhaps it's easier to love a Jew who thinks the way you do and observes the mitzvahs the way you do, but it's a little bit harder to love a Jew who has a very, very different Jewish lifestyle than you. And the key of Ahavat Yisrael is to love another Jew doesn't mean you agree with all his choices. Not all choices are equal. We believe in certain principles, in the mitzvos, in the obligations. And we have to create a home in which those values are transmitted, no doubt about it. But when relating to the larger, broader Jewish people, so then that's where Shalom plays the role, and where we respect and love every single Jew as part of Am Yisrael, even if he or she might have a different view or a different level of Jewish observance. That's, I think, one principle, one element of modern orthodoxy. If somebody were to ask you, what are kind of some of the foundational principles of modern orthodoxy, in the best sense of the term? So number one, it's that you dare to be modern and you dare to be orthodox. There's no contradiction between the two, right? You take the Torah, you take the Masorah, and you apply it to the modern world. I'm not getting into connotations and the way people use it, and is she modern yeshivish? No, I'm just talking about modern orthodox means taking that Torah and tradition and applying it to the real world in which we live. But also another principle of modern orthodoxy is that we strive for maximalism in Torah. We strive for maximalism in halacha. We do not compromise on halacha. But at the same time, we can appreciate all Jews along the spectrum of observance. We could appreciate all Jews whatever level of observance, wherever he or she might be. Now, Rav Amital, let's circle back to Rav Amital, because now we're all getting warmed up. We're getting into it. We're building up momentum here in Ahavat Yisrael. I'm feeling it through the computer. I'm hoping you could hear me, and I'm hoping that you're engaged. So Rav Amital said there's a hierarchy of values, right? Emes versus Shalom. Which one wins out? So every single case is different. What about Am Yisrael versus Eretz Yisrael? All right, LeBron James versus, Giannis, all right, for the basketball fans out there. And please excuse me, and I apologize for quoting basketball players. Who wins out? Is it LeBron or Michael Jordan? Who wins out, Lahavdil? Is it Am Yisrael or is it Eretz Yisrael? Which is more important? So Rav Amital, what?
Sorry, I was going to say it's got to be Am Yisrael first in order to get into Eretz Yisrael.
Ooh, nice. It's got to be Am Yisrael first in order to get into Eretz Yisrael. Very, very nice.
I'm inclined to agree with I'm having a seating room with my friend over there. I think Am Yisrael comes first because until you love Am Yisrael, you can't love Eretz Yisrael.
Very, very nice.
Without Am Yisrael,
that's right. And that's Alan. I don't see. Oh, there's Alan. I see your name.
Yeah, I got a problem with my picture, but I've been here all throughout the Shiur.
Okay, good.
Without Am Yisrael, you cannot have Eretz Yisrael.
Without Am Yisrael, you can't have Eretz Yisrael. That's right. So Rav Amital suggested he felt that Am Yisrael takes precedence over Eretz Yisrael. As important as the land of Israel is, I mean, it's the whole goal of Chumash for the Jewish people to make it into Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu prays 515 tefillos to be able to enter and live in the land. But Am Yisrael, the notion of Am Yisrael takes precedence over Eretz Yisrael. And so Rav Amital felt that this is getting to a politically charged conversation, but it's really theoretical. Rav Amital felt that if it would provide better security for Am Yisrael living in Israel to give away sovereignty over parts of Eretz Yisrael, that's a deal Rav Amital felt we should do. In other words, if indeed we have a peace partner, if That's why I said it's theoretical. But if indeed we have a peace partner, and if indeed the political leaders and the military officials believe that it'll provide better security for Am Yisrael, that it'll save Jewish lives, if we were to, make a peace deal, if we were to give away sovereignty in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Amital felt that's a deal that we should make. Why? Because he based it himself on this hierarchy of values, which is that Am Yisrael takes precedence over Eretz Yisrael. Now, yes. Anyone have a comment or a question? Ron, go ahead.
I do. So I want to go back to the line that you gave us in the beginning. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh.
Go ahead.
That's okay. I can wait for you. You don't know what you means, Rabbi. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh. There's another phrase which is much stronger. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, which means they are all intertwined with each other, like ingredients of a recipe. That if one of them is hurt, everybody else is hurt. Not Zeh Lazeh, but Zeh Bazeh. It appears also as Zeh Bazeh. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. I think it's much stronger than Zeh Lazeh. Because Zeh Lazeh, it means that you're responsible for your brother. Here, you're part of you are intertwined with each other, part of an ingredient. So if something goes wrong, the whole cooking goes, bad, because each one of you is important. You get hurt, everybody else gets hurt. If one Jew gets hurt, all the other ones get hurt too.
We're all intertwined. We're all in the same boat. And Arev is that we're all mixed together like ingredients. That's a beautiful idea.
It's a different in one letter, that's all.
Okay. Now, Miriam, I think, Miriam, you had a thought? Okay, Miriam, you're muted, so we don't hear you.
You can talk.
Hi, Rabbi. This is probably a little bit off the derech, but since I deal with genealogy, so I like to take the phrases Kol Yisrael Krovim, either Zeh Lazeh or Bazeh. So the difference between an Ayin and a Kuf is just Peh Tzadik. Or whatever you want to do with it,
Very nice, meaning that's so nice, that Kol Yisrael Krovim Zeh Lazeh.
Whether it's Krovim Zeh Lazeh or Bazeh, which I can never figure out either, but nevertheless, Arevim and Krovim, it's pretty close.
Very nice. Yeah, very, very nice. Yeah, go ahead, Miriam. Thank you.
I just want to comment on that for a moment. What Ben said.
Go ahead. We hear you, Miriam.
Yes. That means such different things, though. Krovim and Arevim, even though only the first letter is being changed. The first letter, sometimes any letter in a word changes the word, and therefore it changes the meaning. Krovim, to be close to each other. Zeh Lazeh, Zeh Bazeh, which means pretty much the same thing. It's so different than Arevim, because you could be very close. You could be close to people that you hardly know. You can feel close. But Arevim gives you an extra action to do. One is your feeling, you're close, but the other is asking you to be active, to do a mitzvah, to do a something, and that's when it's Arevim, because you are responsible for each other, and therefore responsible. Yeah. But the other thing, but when we talked before about or Eretz, make an artificial dichotomy that doesn't have to exist. Because and Eretz can be very togetherness. They don't have to be looked at separately, unless we need to look at it separately for some philosophical argument or discussion we're having. Otherwise, they're very close. But sometimes when you have an Eretz first, you don't need an arm to take it.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for those comments in terms of that. Krovim is that for us to be close together, but Arevim implies a certain sense of responsibility and action that you need to take. And when we think about, Ahavat Yisrael, so what I've tried to demonstrate is that it's not just, the responsibility, but rather to see ourselves as in it together like one body. And beyond that, that it's even more important, as we said it's even more important and takes precedence over Eretz Yisrael. And to try to see the sweetness and the goodness of other Jews. But what about if you have to give of yourself a little bit for the benefit of Am Yisrael? Where do we see that concept? Rav Amital also emphasized that idea that there are many times where you have to make small sacrifices for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. And I don't want to get into this whole issue of the Kotel compromise, but this is something to consider very, very strongly in terms of, of course, I would prefer, we'd all prefer for there to be just, traditional Orthodox prayer at the Kotel, and that's it. But with all the different factors and the complexity of the situation, I think it's important to consider that sometimes you need to give of yourself a little bit. You need to step back a little bit. You need to sacrifice a little bit for the benefit of Am Yisrael. Where do we see this notion? So we see this notion actually by the Kohen, who is mitaher the other person with the para aduma waters. And we know that if a person is tamei meis, a person came into contact with a dead body, or carried an aron, carried a casket, or was in a cemetery, so technically speaking, they become tamei meis. Now, this doesn't really, for a Kohen, is not allowed to become, to defile himself to a dead body. For people who are not Kohanim, so then it doesn't really have that much relevance nowadays. It had relevance really in the old days when you wanted to bring a carbon and go to the Beis Hamikdash or go to Yerushalayim or bring the carbon Pesach, so then you needed to be Tahar. So the only way to become Tahar, the only way to purify yourself from corpse defilement is through the red heifer mixture. And the Kohanim were the ones, in the Beis Hamikdash, the Kohanim were the ones who mixed the different ingredients together, the crimson thread and the hyssop and the ashes of the paraduma of the red heifer, and they would sprinkle it. They would sprinkle it onto the defiled person on the third day and the seventh day. And then the person would go to the mikvah on the seventh day and he'd become tahor after the 7-day process. What's fascinating is that the Kohanim that are involved in the preparation of the ashes, as many of you know, they would become tamei themselves. They would become defiled themselves. They don't need the para aduma waters. They're not defiled for the course of 7 days, but they're tamei for 1 day. And what's interesting here is why did the halacha? Can you think why is this? It's a strange halacha. Why would the halacha establish that the Kohanim who are there to help another Jew become pure, why should they become defiled themselves? And this is one of the things that stumped the wisest of all people, Shlomo HaMelech, where he couldn't figure out why you can have the same waters that purify one and defile others. Well, I mean, it's easy to think about that because if you have glasses, right? A person with bad vision, so the glasses will correct your vision. But if you have good vision, the glasses will hurt your vision. So we can see that you could have the same mixture that could be a benefit for one and be harmful to another with medications and other things as well. But why should halacha build it into the system that the Kohen would become tamei when he purifies another Jew? And I think this enforces the idea that we're trying to develop, that you have to step back and make small sacrifices for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. If you want to excel and succeed in Ahavat Yisrael, so it can't just be if you get your way with everything. It can't just be if you're getting everything you want. What it means to say is that even if you have to make a little bit of a sacrifice, even if you don't get your way, so you're going to be willing to do it for the benefit of the greater good. The Kohanim, they have to make the Mikdash accessible to everyone. And so they have to experience some tumah, some level of defilement to show that sometimes you need to bring yourself down to raise somebody else up. And by the way, the person who does the sprinkling, he's the one exception. He doesn't become tameh. And I think it might have been Lubavitch Rebbe who said that, that to go in Kiruv and to go out there into these, in these far-flung places in the world, it's hard, and you get a little dirty and you get a little tameh. But if you're the one doing the sprinkling, if you're the one personally involved and engaged in teaching Torah to someone, in helping raise somebody up, in doing chesed and teaching Torah, then you don't become tameh, you don't become defiled at all. But that's with that exception. But in general, the Kohanim that are involved in preparing the eshes, they become tameh. So you see from here this concept that with Ahavat Yisrael, you have to make small sacrifices for the benefit of Klal Yisrael, and that's something to think about whether it's the Kotel compromise, whether it's other things that, or whether look, this is a complicated thing. But let's say you're invited to a simcha of a cousin at a reform shul. So you're not allowed to daven without a mechitza. So you have to daven at a hashkama minyan, at an orthodox minyan. You have to daven on your own. But in terms of attending and going to the non-orthodox shul, and if it's really meaningful to the family member, so that's an example of a case where Shalom, where I think personally, look, every case is different, and every person is in different situation. But I think that's an example of a case where I've told people that Shalom wins out, and for Shalom Bayis and Shalom for the extended family. So, and it's going to be meaningful. You go to the simcha, that'll give them a good feeling about Torah and mitzvos, and who knows, that'll maybe bring them closer over the course of their lives. You daven on your own, in an Orthodox minyan, you daven beforehand. But that's an example of giving of yourself a little bit for the benefit of others. And I think that's a crucial principle with regards to Ahavat Yisrael. Let me end with a thought about Sukkot, because Sukkot is coming up in a couple of months, just like Pesach is coming up several months after that. And so on Sukkot, you have two main mitzvos. Actually, before Sukkot, I'll just tell a story that you might have heard from me about the little Rav Naftali of Rupshitz, that when he was a young boy, he was studying the letters of the alphabet. And he came to the letter Yud, and the Malamed, the teacher, said to him that, a Yud is also a Yid. And when you put two Yuds next to each other, it spells out the name of Hashem. Right? Really, the name of Hashem is Yud Kei Vav Kei, but sometimes in some Sidurim and some Svarim, it says Yud Yud, it spells the name of Hashem. So he said to little Naftali, he said, you see from here that when a Jew supports another Jew, when a Jew has Ahavat Yisrael, you create the name of Hashem in this world. A couple of weeks later, they were studying the Nakudot of the letters, and they came to the Shva, they came to the two dots, and the Malamed, the teacher, said to little Naftali, that this doesn't make any sound. This is the Shva, it doesn't make any sound. So Rav Naftali, who went on to become the great Rav Naftali of Rupshitz, but he was a young boy at the time. He was obviously an Ilui and a very intelligent boy. And he said, wait a second, 2 weeks ago you told me that when you put two dots next to each other, it spells out the name of Hashem. Now you're telling me when you have two dots next to each other, you get zero, you get nothing. Why the difference? So the teacher said, the difference is that when you have two Jews, two Yudin, next to each other, respecting one another, that makes the name of Hashem. But if one Jew thinks that he or she is superior to the other, you think you're better than the other, then you have absolutely nothing. We really don't know who is better than the other, because in life it's not just where you are, but what direction you're heading in. And one thing I wanted to share with you is the Chazon Ish. The Gemara says that if you have someone who's a heretic or who is an apikores, so it speaks very harshly about that individual. It even says that if he's stuck in a pit, then you don't care, you don't waste your time to try to help him because he's a heretic. He rejects the Torah. But the Chazon Ish, who was not the liberal, Chazon Ish was not the modern Orthodox, I wouldn't call him. The Chazon Ish, in the mid 20th century, gives an amazing comment. He says that statement in the Gemara that asks us to take a very harsh approach with the heretic, with the person who's not observant. That was in those days. In the old days, the hand of Hashem was explicit. Jewish observance was the norm. And so lack of observance and rejecting Torah was something that was an exception, that's something unusual. And so during those days when the Jewish world was largely observant and lack of observance was an exception, that's when a harsh approach would be deserved and maybe would make a difference, maybe would serve as a deterrent to other people. However, nowadays, and I'm reading in the English, he says, in our times, the Chazon Ish says, when we do not see open miracles, and when in these acts of punishment, in other words, if you're going to be harsh, there's going to be no heel of the breach, you're not going to be improving the situation, then this law is not operable. In other words, nowadays, the hand of Hashem is more hidden. And the lack of observance is sadly, unfortunately, very pervasive, very prevalent. And so in this case, the Chazon Ish says, the very opposite is the case nowadays. It is incumbent upon us to reach out to the minim, to the heretics, with avotot ahava, with ropes of love, with chains of love, and to place them in a ray of light to the greatest extent possible. And the Rambam also, spoke about the concept of tinok shenishba, where you have a Jew who's a product of a non-Orthodox environment, devoid of the opportunity to study Torah and practice Judaism, that we kind of recognize the fact that he or she didn't have that same level of education. And so we shouldn't look down on such a person. And again, it's not just where you are, but what direction you're heading in. And we don't know who's on a higher level. And that's why Rav Naftali Abrupt, the teacher, said, if there's two dots, one above the other, then you get nothing. But if you respect one another, side by side, you stand in solidarity and you speak with respect towards another Jew, then you spell out the name of Hashem, and that will help bring the person closer to Torah. That'll make a Kiddush Shem Shemayim, and that'll make your life more pleasant as well if you engage him in that kind of way. I might have shared with you once a story about Rav Aryeh Levine, who was at a party, some simcha, and there was a young man who was a student of his who was avoiding him the whole evening. When they finally met up, did I tell you this story? When they finally met up, so Rav Aryeh Levine said to the boy, he said, Shimon, whatever his name was, Shimon, did I do something wrong to you? You have been avoiding me during the whole simcha. So the young man said to Rav Aryeh Levine, the great tzaddik in our time, right, from the book is called Great Tzaddik in Our Time. Rav Aryeh Levine was an incredible tzaddik of Yerushalayim. Benji Levine, his grandson, once told us a story that the publisher of the New York Times traveled to Eretz Yisrael to meet with the great saint of Jerusalem, Rav Aryeh Levine. In any case, so Rav Aryeh Levine said, did I do something wrong? And the young man said, no, the reason why I've been avoiding you really, Rebbe, is because I'm not wearing a kippah. As you see, I'm not wearing a kippah. And he was embarrassed to talk to the Rebbe because he wasn't wearing a kippah at the simcha. And Rav Aryeh Levine, who happened to be, was a short man, and this young man was tall. And Rav Aryeh Levine said, Shimon, you're much taller than me. I can't see what's on top of your head. The only thing I can see is your heart. And you have a good heart, and that's the only thing that's important. Let me leave you with one idea. I promised you an idea about Sukkot. It's interesting with regards to Sukkot, with the etrog, the Torah explicitly says you have to take a beautiful etrog. We take hours and hours and hours trying to find the perfect etrog. Some people, spend so much time. I think it might have been Rav Shimon Schwab who said that I wish that people would examine their business dealings as long as they examine the esrog. But in any case, the esrog has supposed to be perfect. But with regards to the Sukkah, which is the other central mitzvah of Sukkot, there's no requirement of beauty. The Torah simply says, Basukkah teishu shivad yamim, sit in the Sukkah for 7 days. And yes, okay, we try to beautify the Sukkah, no doubt. But the Sukkah doesn't need to have 4 walls. It could have 3 walls. The Sukkah has cracks in the ceiling and in the walls. It could be, 40 inches high. It could be a little shaky. So why is there this distinction between the lulav and esrog on the one hand and the sukkah on the other hand? And I believe the answer might be because lulav and esrog, the pasuk says that you have to take it for yourselves. The waving of the daled minim is a personal responsibility. You have to personally own, right? Halachically, you have to own the lulav and esrog set. On the first day, at least when it's a biblical obligation, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah with somebody else's lulav and esrog. With regards to sukkah, my friends, it's kol ezrach Yisrael yeshu basukkot. It's about others. It's about all of Israel joining together in one sukkah. Not practically, then conceptually, right? You can fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah in somebody else's sukkah, because sukkah represents community, represents Am Yisrael. And so perhaps with this distinction, now we can understand why with esrog, you need to have maximalism. You need to strive for perfection with the esrog. Because when you're talking about the goal of becoming better and better, the idea of demanding perfection from yourself and from your family, that's a personal responsibility. And when someone wants to work hard, you want to be machmer, you want to take on additional obligations, they can and should, within measure, knowing yourself, of course, but then you should take it upon yourself to become the best that you could be. You want to be the best. However, when it concerns community, of course, you also want the community to be strong. You want to work together with others to make it as strong and as religiously conducive as possible. But when it comes to community, you have to aspire to ideals. But you also, in the context of community, when it concerns the entire spectrum of the Jewish people, so then we have to ultimately be accepting of imperfections. With regards to ourselves, highest of standards. But in our interactions with others, then we emphasize tolerance, sensitivity, inclusivity. And that's why the lulav and esrog have the requirement of beauty, and it has to be as perfect as possible. But with regards to the sukkah, it has imperfections. We allow for leniencies, we allow for imperfections, right? It could be 3 walls, it could be partial walls, it could be spaces between the schach, there could be holes and gaps in the ceiling. The sukkah is the quintessential imperfect structure, because when in dealing with community, right, we don't always get our way, and things are not perfect, but we're loving and caring for all Jews, and we invite all Jews into our conceptual sukkah on Sukkot and throughout the year. So with that, I'm happy to take a couple of a question or two or a comment, and to thank you all so much for joining. We'll get two comments or questions. Yeah, Ayala.
I love your idea. That is very special thought to be left with as we approach Sukkot. Unfortunately, we don't know if we'll be able to bring anyone into our sukkah, but it's a great thought. I like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayala. And Madeline, go ahead.
I was just thinking, you're talking about all this beautiful Ahavat Chinam. So what happens though when?
Okay, so we don't typically put somebody in cherem. That could be in like extreme extenuating circumstances, Madeline. Like let's say if somebody is not giving a get to his wife, where he's really he's keeping somebody in chains and really being abusive. So then there might be extreme cases where we might put a person in cherem. Well, that gets into the thing that, yeah, Ahavat Yisrael is extremely important, but it doesn't mean it's the only factor. There's also other considerations depending upon the situation. If you remember, I said that, let's say if, right, you're not supposed to demonstrate Ahavat Yisrael. If you know somebody's dishonest and you have a friend who's considering, going into a business deal with that person, so then it's not the time for Ahavat Yisrael. Then it's a time to protect your friend so that they shouldn't lose their money, their life savings, and going into business with that person. So it's a great point, Madeline, that Ahavat Yisrael is primary, is a priority, is crucial, and it's something we all need to work on. But sometimes there's other factors and considerations. Okay, Laila Tov, thank you all so much, and keep increasing that love for one another. Love to all.
May your fathers
Hopefully, Besorot Tovot.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was beautiful.
Thank you. My father is very much on my mind, and thank you for those wishes, and thank you for learning together.
That's amazing that man